Is anybody not ready then? Did everyone get the doc in the email chain?
Yeah.
Okay. Is anybody not ready? We affirm contention one is hedged. U.S. hedge is eroding. Warner 25. The U.S. is imploding from a global power to an international outcast. The U.S. is competing with China for global influence, and the U.S. is behind on nuclear developments. Nordic was 24. The West has grown increasingly cautious about nuclear. China has forged ahead. It has more nuclear reactors under construction than any other nation. The U.S. must work to double track its energy efforts. China also intends to build 150 new nuclear reactors between 2020 and 2035, which includes a target of selling 30 nuclear reactors via its Belt and Road Initiative to states it can deserve its vassals, expected to surpass the U.S. in the nuclear-generated electricity by 2030. An app investment is key as L24. The U.S. embrace of nuclear energy could triple its nuclear power generation by 2050. Both fund the future and provide necessary funding today to appropriately maintain America's existing fleet of nuclear reactors. And the time is now. Nordic was 24. Now is the time to double down on U.S. nuclear development and leverage a domestic workforce that has recently absorbed the know-how knowledge of nuclear reactor construction from the Vogtle. The longer the U.S. waits to construct a reactor, the more it risks a brain drain from the first batch of expertise gained in decades. And this is key to hegemony. Hildebrand and L24. The strength of our nuclear industry directly supports our competitiveness abroad, which in turn affects our ability to uphold the highest global norms of the nuclear security and non-proliferation. Failure to compete overseas will enable China, Russia, and other rivals to erode our influence. The time is now in the 2025 reconciliation process to save the critical sector from opening its global market to China, and nuclear energy is increasingly geopolitically significant. Baker et al. 17. The world's nuclear capacity to double by 2050, capturing even a portion of the market size would produce enormous rewards for America, and energy is specifically key. Halo 2. There are 3 reasons to expect energy to be a factor in the rise of nations to hegemonic power. First, societies require energy to grow. Second, the types of energy systems used to set limits on humans. Third, since different energy sources exhibit different limitation, advantages may be considered a significant factor in hegemony, and the impact of this is Chinese power. China's rise will cause conflict. Kim 19. As China's influence increases, Washington makes every effort to assert its global dominance. A U.S. fear about China overtaking U.S. hegemony persists. A conflict between the two hegemonic powers is likely, and this goes nuclear. Talmud 17. Chinese nuclear escalation in the event of a conventional war with the U.S. is a significant risk, despite China's no first use policy, and this causes extinction. TAR 14. Small nuclear war include catastrophic disruptions of the global climate. A global famine result. A war fought with less than half the U.S. nuclear weapons would destroy the human race. Contention 2 is food. Farmland is declining substantially. Zuloff et al. 24. Land in the U.S. farms has declined 74 million acres, 8% fewer acres, and food insecurity is increasing. NACO 24. Food insecurity increased to 13.5%, and affirming is key for 2 reasons. The first is saving farmland. Leo 23. Electricity production from renewables could drive up land use and land cover change, threatening biodiversity and food security. Intensified competition for land use, exacerbating farmland loss. Nuclear power is by far the most land efficient for electricity generation compared to the other energy sources, 18 times less than hydropower plants and 34 times less than solar. And nuclear energy is the best for land conservation. Brook and Bradshaw 14. Nuclear power kill our fossil fuel addiction, help mitigate climate change and avoid destructive use of natural and agricultural landscapes for biofuels, and diffuse energy generation and thus reduce the environmental footprint by sparing land. The second way is through nuclear technologies. Radiation solves food insecurity. 1021. Nuclear science and technology facilitates the breeding of hardier plant varieties done by exposing them to radiation and selecting the mutations that make them more likely to survive. Food irradiation improves the food safety and increases the shelf life of produce by killing microorganisms and pests that cause illness and rot, all without leaving any residual radiation behind, fighting hunger across the globe. And this relies on the affirmative. Gosh 22. Nuclear power comes from the energy in nuclear fission and triggers a chain reaction that produces radiation. And the impact of all this is food wars. A lack of agricultural land preservation poses an existential risk to U.S. agriculture and society. Forget it out 20. American farmland provides food security, economic prosperity, and environmental quality. All of these benefits are threatened by poorly planned development, poorly planned how we destroy the food. Many of these farms are small with low profit margins, thus especially vulnerable to competition for land. And U.S. agriculture is key to global food supply. Haslund et al. 20. The U.S. is central player in international food trade, interconnected, especially for staple commodities to the global food system. Disruption of U.S. production can have far-reaching impacts, and this causes instability in nuclear war. Porteous 20. Emerging bodies of evidence that minor shocks of food supply precipitated international unrest, civil war, land in the hands of terrorists, or nuclear war, decreasing our resilience to catastrophes. And Hayes 18 continues. Nuclear terrorists use nuclear materials against targets and impel a state to escalate against another state in the belief that this state sponsor an attack that triggers nuclear war, which causes extinction per star. Thus we affirm.
I'm sending out case right now.
Do you want the two?
I already have one set.
Oh, okay.
Thanks, so.
Yeah.
I just sent it. Did everyone get it?
I'm still waiting. Oh, I just got it.
Just tell me when you're ready.
I'm ready.
Just to clarify, my name is Ryan Magani, the 7 Lakes, second egg. Start on my first word. Contention one is oil. Multiple indicators confirm the economy is stable despite market uncertainty. Pessimistic predictions are driven by politics and non-affairs. Fox 326. High inflation expectations express political dissatisfaction in view of actual contention. Wage growth in European pandemic trends consistent with low inflation. Wage growth 3.6% over the past few months compared to the pre-pandemic trend of 3.1. U.S. crude oil is near 7-year average 68.34 with U.S. production near record levels. No OPEC scaling back countries. No sign of oil prices will surge. The unemployment is at 4.1%. Historically low. The layoff rate is 1%. But increased investment in net zero emissions kills the oil industry. IEA 23. Factors in net zero words to major downside remarks in net zero and context of oil. Many see concentration of production among a small number of countries lead to high security concerns. Major increase in clean energy investment drive drop in fossil fuel use by 500 billion, half of the level in 2023. Overinvestment occur if oil industry invests for long-term growth and demand does not materialize. Structural declines more present new risk. Factors falling projects fail to recover lead to difficulty for economies in which oil sales make up a significant share. A reduction of oil prices lead to widespread losses for the oil industry. And it risk broader economic decline during the mid-transition period expiring at all 23. From the transition, Russell saw the U.S. could be negatively affected. Economic growth and stability as a result of parallel emerging low carbon tech and persistent fossil-based infrastructure. Each energy system was operation contains the other substantial low carbon energy investment shortfall at $3 trillion per year for transition gaining momentum. A large amount of fossil has become stranded. Investment exceeds perceived future needs. Volatility persists. The market declines. Investment demand coordination becomes harder. Assets are vulnerable to stranding and stop returning profit before the end of life cycle. Declining demand for oil and gas and disproportionate macroeconomic impacts on producing countries drive geopolitical conflict to capture larger shares of declining markets. The decline causes nuclear war by initiating escalation without global hotspots, which started at all 24. Systems require the small shot past the 10 component resilience, vulnerabilities, amplified downturns, most central risks with greatest potential to trigger others escalating chaos between those and how long power step in. Eroding covers of conflict containment flashpoints contribute to conflict contagion, lead to destabilization, driving major powers and escalating directly involve nukes. You can cross-play star for extinction, and it locks in carbon extinction carbon emissions granted all 24. Plans create a processing fields to increase emissions during a period when the carbon budget will be reached. Every fractional expenditure matters. The U.S. and Russia lost 12% of carbon budget. Pressure to use or lose are great among these key incumbents of the carbon regime. Interest in contracting plants willing to burn fossil fuels earlier and produce a green paradox. Cumulative impact on carbon budget significant in key countries. Emissions will grow more if the reserves are discovered. Extinction D19. CC causes extinction due to non-linearity positive feedback that the tipping point to rough action cops of rapid zero, driving fires increase fire, or driving force increase fires and higher sometimes release methane. There are other factors the adaptability limit to heat stress and model warming expose large fraction of the population to unprecedented heat stress, making extinction likely. Contention 2 is prolific. Trump's action with Ukraine put us on the brink of nuclear proliferation. Even one country pursuing nukes cascades globally. Talk 9. Non-proliferation on the verge of collapse. One nation launched nuclear projects. Others quickly follow. Provoke response from Russia, China to destabilize and tackle Ukraine under allied confidence and deterrence. France extend nuclear Belgium. Other country leaders praise the idea. Countries hinting on launching development. Affirming would invest in the HALEU program that underpins all nuclear energy tech. NEIT 27. The DOE promised to research and acquire HALEU transportation package. Many reactor designs require HALEU to achieve longer operating cycles and increase efficiencies. On message for Trump. Investment roads, non-proliferation safeguards, and other deterrence calls to 912. HALEU's termination level has a number of non-proliferation applications. Reprocessing rates nuclear latency issues and states that currently do not reprocess the difference of 60% less effort required for enriching HALEU. The HALEU spec will contain much higher levels of U-235 80% or more as an increase in safe producing, holding, and fabricating HALEU have application for safeguards. States are prepared to avert costs in the interest of R&D. Tech gets exported globally. Line 21. U.S. reactor development and implicate prolific advantage to export new reactors to other countries, and other countries likely to emulate the U.S. program. European proliferates nuclear war, entanglement, and misconduct arms races are also 23. Expansion of nuclear strength fuel tension. Russia has against uncertainties further undermine NATO's nuclear threats. A large group of European democracies can only be expected to take a unanimous decision. European missile plans worsen regional arms race involve escalation due to the difficulty of distinguishing nuke and conventional warheads. Deployment on submarines would trigger responses from adversaries despite the superior over Russia. Feeling investigative faces in Europe make Gulf receptive to rely on nukes. Deploying nukes may be more likely. Cross-play star for the terminalization. And the prolific collapse of global governance, Shang 22. Arms control crucial for global governance. The failure intensifies stresses for core of the international system. Arms races absorb immense financial time, human resources, control, mitigate advanced weaponry, emerging tech risk. It falls into the hand of terrorists, other active drones, and laws exacerbate competition, make conflict more destructive. Effective governance is a prerequisite to solving existential risk. Willis 24. Global governance determine how swiftly countries respond to risk, reducing consequences of CC, nuclear work, supervolcano, or asteroid will require significant investment in governance preparedness. Planning institutions will need to develop communication and trust regulations and norms, reduce risk, minimize development of dangerous AI. Are you ready for cross?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you want the first question?
Yeah, I can take the first question.
Alright.
Alright, let's look at the evidence that says when we have when we do investment in nuclear technology, it erodes non-proliferation safeguards. Can you read me a highlighted line from that evidence that says safeguards go away when we do nuclear investment?
That's not just in the Carlson evidence. I'd rather you look at the Lyman evidence. It's more explicit in this, but even then, the Carlson evidence is also still pretty explicit insofar as we're raising the issues of nuclear latency, which is a country's ability to produce nuclear weapons. Obviously, that's going to erode non-proliferation norms because if countries are perceived as having the ability to produce nuclear weapons, weapons, it's going to spark some sort of threat perception in other countries, causing like non-proliferation.
You just made a bridge that doesn't exist in your evidence. You just
Again,
said that
the
your
line of
evidence
is
has
really good
nuclear.
at this. It's a bridge that's been pretty filled in by our evidence.
What you just said in response to my question was that your evidence says that there would be nuclear latency issues, which essentially what your evidence is saying is that countries might suddenly develop the ability to have those nuclear weapons. If you go further into the article, nowhere does it say that just because they suddenly have the ability, all of the previous safeguards or safeguards completely go away.
I can read you a line in the evidence. It says
Sure.
an increase in states producing, holding, and fabricating how you have implications for safeguards. I think that's pretty explicit.
Sure, implications for
question.
safeguards, which says that they could implement them or change them.
That's not what an implication is. It's that the U.S. countries need to implement these safeguards. It's not saying that.
Can you read me the quote for that then, if you have the line?
What?
If that is really the safeguards your article talks about, read me the line.
Again, the article does not say that countries are going to be implementing these safeguards. It says that there is a necessity to do that. No one has introduced evidence or any sort of analysis that countries will be implementing these safeguards. You can on this for a minute and a half. I'll take a question. All right. So why is U.S. hedge declining?
We would say that because they're competing with China right now and they're building a lot more allies.
No, but you need this evidence. Can you read me a line from your first piece of evidence that says that U.S. hedge is declining because of its lack of nuclear capacity?
Yeah, it says the United States is imploding from a global power to an international outcast. The U.S. is competing with China for global influence.
Where does that have to do with nuclear?
Sure, it's the way a case construction works, right? We tell you the reason and the main threat to U.S. hegemony is Chinese power. Then the rest of our case tells you that where China is leading the U.S. is nuclear development. Currently, they're building 150 new nuclear reactors by 2035, and we have 0 in production. Later on, we tell you that the ability to control nuclear energy, which is the future of energy demand internationally, is the way to control hegemony, right?
This argument just definitely is not true. There are definitely other things that are causing U.S. hegemony to erode. For example, Trump's more inward-looking stance, him imposing tariffs on other countries, allowing them to get a leg up on the U.S. because they're not going to import to the U.S., meaning that they have the ability to facilitate more domestic manufacturing, and also just generally Trump's withdrawal from security alliances all definitely mean that there's not
Sure, you can read implications of alternate causes. Our impact scenario is specifically that when the U.S. declines power in the face of China, that causes a conflict. It doesn't rely on outside factors.
Again, and you have to explain why nuclear energy is uniquely key to solve every single issue that the U.S. has.
The entirety of our contention one, which
does not indicate.
That's the entirety of our contention one, which I just explained, which is that nuclear energy is a cornerstone for hegemony.
Again,
China's winning, the U.S. is losing.
The first piece of evidence does not cite nuclear energy as the main cause for U.S. hegemony.
Let me know when y'all got that. Just gonna go their case top down. Okay. Is anyone not ready?
Alright, got it.
Okay. Starting on oil and the economy. First is the news. The economy is structurally stagnating. Diet all 25. Secular stagnation due to unemployment and underutilized capacity. Empirical work in the U.S. suggests that business dynamics have been declining. Preferred, it's more holistic than their Fox evidence, and our evidence doesn't talk about politics, which their evidence indicts. But then, 2, turn nuclear industry increased economic growth. Nested in Run 24. Nuclear power plants employ sizable workforce and support energy supply chain networks generate significant economic ripple effects across many industries. These expenditures and new spending activity helps contribute to long-run economic growth. Preferred on timer. This is long-run economic growth, whereas they're at their best is a short-term dip. But then 3, turn nuclear energy reduces energy poverty. Fall at 16. High energy costs disproportionately hurt the poor minorities from new green energy 4 times as expensive as electricity from existing nuclear power plants. The cost of producing goods and services that use electricity increase effectively, raising the price of almost everything. Besides some severity, it harms minorities the worst under green energy because poverty kills them first. But then 4, turn fossil reliance affects the economy. Halverson 22. Our reliance on fossil fuels also challenges our economic security. Rising hospitalizations, crop failures, and increased level of natural disasters all damage our economic output, costing the U.S. up to 10.5% of its GDP by 2100. This advancement in nuclear reactor technology has the potential to produce more energy in a more efficient manner, and decreasing oil dependence per their own link solves. Then 5, turn nuclear energy mitigates green transition risk and reinvigorates growth. Bennett and Gilbert 22. U.S. clean energy creates high union jobs and guarantees benefits of workers affected by the transition. Nuclear energy support of labor unions. Nuclear can increase support for climate action and alleviate negative economic impacts. Build out reactors, boost employment. On climate. 1 in 10 emissions are increasing. Clapper 24. Hundreds of non-track to limit global warming. Triple nuclear capacity is part of a realistic path to meet net zero goals by 2050. Emissions are expected to increase by 2030. Prefer this because they read zero uniqueness for their climate scenario. 2, turn nuclear energy solves rising emissions. Matthew 21. Nuclear power contributes to the climate change target. No greenhouse gas emissions during their operation. Only low emissions produced over the full cycle. Without nuclear energy, would not be possible to combat climate change. 3, turn protecting biodiversity. Brooke and Bradshaw 14. Nuclear energy is a good option for biodiversity conservation. Nuclear power provides a lower threat to eliminating fossil fuel dependence, and biodiversity is key to stopping climate change. UN. Biodiversity forms a web of life that we depend on for so many things. These ecosystems and biodiversity, they contain our natural carbon sinks, providing so-called nature-based solutions to climate change, and the 1/3 of the greenhouse gas emissions reductions needed in the next solution decade could be achieved by improving nature's ability to absorb emissions. 4. Turn mining and land use drive decarbonization. Sonnet L23. If the U.S. is 122% greater than natural shortage caused by energy consumption, biological capacity, imports, and depletion, the U.S. is rated second highest, may serve as the ground for countries. Uranium has high density reducing pollution brought on by its mining. Circular economy is aided by recyclable waste from nuclear power to slow consumption. On Prolif. 1. It's unique. Their Tucker evidence concedes that Prolif is going to happen now because of Trump, which they cannot solve for. 2. Turn ceding leadership to adversaries. Agenda 23. The U.S. considered a leader on nuclear safety. U.S. nuclear experts have weighed to and so the influence of the U.S. China's tracking potential nuclear use by not adhering to strict standards. This links in and always on severity. Russia and China are more likely to encourage Prolif or of dangerous actors like Iran to counter the U.S. 3. Turn ally cooperation. Colombia 20. One element of a U.S. nuclear energy strategy could be to pursue deep country cooperation with key U.S. allies, Canada, the U.K., France, Japan, and South Korea. And alliances are key to stop Prolif. 421. America's alliances have also provided reassurance to those who might otherwise fear being the victims, reducing the incentive for that such states would otherwise have failed to pursue the development of nuclear weaponry. 4. Turn encouraging reliance. CACNP. Produce nuclear weapons mitigated by encouraging states to rely on the international market for their nuclear fuel supply instead of requiring proliferation-sensitive fuel cycle technologies. And reliance means the U.S. has more leverage to deter proliferation. 5. Turn stopping cyber attacks. Ranahan 21. Military-based dependence on local energy grids creates a national security concern. Nuclear possibilities offer options for energy dependence. The base itself is targeted via cyber attack. And cyber attacks are bad because they cause miscalc. Fowler 21. Misjudging the impact and collateral damage of a cyber attack can lead to a range of unintended ramifications. Miscalculations become alarmingly easy. The effects of cyber attack are becoming increasingly difficult to predict and control. This A outweighs on probability because miscalc is the most likely route to war. B outweighs on probability again because cyber attacks are more probable because it's easy to avoid accountability, whereas there's many international ramifications for Prolif, and also outweighs on probability because cyber attacks are unattributable, they're more likely to happen, whereas where they're more likely to cause war, whereas Prolif, there's a ton of knowledge and a ton of surveillance mechanisms, which means that miscalc is likely to happen, and it was in time frame because cyber attack tech exists and can happen instantly, whereas Prolif takes decades. There's one piece of probability weighing that wasn't on the top.
That's fine. We'll start our prep now. Stop at 154.
No.
Are you right? These are allowed.
Sorry, how much was that?
154.
Oh.
Is everyone good?
I'm still waiting on the top.
Okay. In the meantime, it's just going to be the neg and the F.
Oh, I just got it. Okay. I'm good.
This strategy might work in other realms, but not in this one. Reading one uniqueness and reading a bunch of link responses that don't correlate with it at all does not work. Go to econ specifically. Firstly, they say that overall stagnation is happening. At best, there's absolutely no terminalization to our scenario. Our scenario is a short-term decline, which immediately escalates hotspots, while their scenario is overall long-term growth. One, we say that they conceive that overall immediately destroys the economy because we're not able to transition fast enough from oil and overinvestment, which immediately kill climate efforts. Now, specifically, I'll line by line their responses. They say structurally we're going down. Sure, at best, they concede that sure. One, our evidence postdates and identifies that we're flourishing right now as a result of high wage growth, which definitely indicates that businesses are thriving. Then they say that solves poverty. Absolutely no uniqueness. Poverty is definitely not increasing. Does not matter. Then they say we decrease reliance. Read the evidence. 20 to 100. Oh my God. Does not matter. Then. They say increased jobs, no warrant as to why jobs are immediately going to go up. We would say, at best, this time frame is going to be so long. Here's why this matters. One, it takes way too long to get the land. Then it takes time to construct the nuclear reactors. Then it takes time to actually create energy that is efficient for jobs. Then it takes time to actually be able to export that. All of that takes so much time it takes so much time to happen, and it cross applies to every single one of their arguments. It's evidently we do not have enough time to actually solve back for these emissions. Now on climate change, they say emissions are increasing right now. We will concede to the uniqueness that emissions are increasing. None of their terms actually respond insofar as the analysis I made above. It takes way too long for nuclear reactors to solve. Now go to Prolif. Firstly, on Prolif, first they've not contextualized it to our uniqueness. Our uniqueness says we're on the brink. Only one other country pursuing it will trigger it. And they concede that they're the one other country by A, allowing the U.S. to invest in nuclear technology, and B, exporting that nuclear technology elsewhere. Both of which concedes that it'll allow European countries to proliferate. Even if their arguments are you can better have cooperation, does not terminalize to our scenario. I urge you to read the evidence. What countries are in the EU? It definitely does not terminalize. Even then, I'll still respond to it. No uniqueness on any of these terms. You would say cooperation is probably at an all-time high since they've conceded the uniqueness. And on miscalc, literally no uniqueness on cyber warfare. It does not matter. Their case. Alright. Firstly, we're going to read reasons why overall nuclear energy fails. One, inefficient regulation. It hamstrings deployment and drives across. Right, 3. Nuclear operator needs design approved, receive safety approved, and to receive an operating license to begin. Each step takes years, but the NRC has a strong incentive to regulate with as little efficiency as possible. The NRC is required to recover 90% of its budget from the company. The most attractive option is to keep the application process for going as long as humanly possible to recover as much money for the applicant gets a final operating license. The average time jumped to 20 years to get a plant operational. Cost for $1,000 per kilowatt of capacity. The NRC brought up the cost to $8,100. And skip the lobbying response, go to tech advancements. Each iteration creates new risks and claims about improvements that have zero empirics to back them up. UCS 21. Claim developers make are largely unproven concept from more than 50 years ago. They assert reactors have the potential to lower costs, reduce waste, burn efficiently, lower the risk of prolif. Sodium reactors would be less uranium efficient, experience safety problems, burn exposed to air and water, and uncontrollable power increases result in rapid core melting. New breed and burn concept is saddled with obstacles and safety hazards. Fuel to remain in the reactor longer, allowing fission to and gas to build. Skip the rest of the responses, go to C1. Firstly, you should hold the line. All of their link evidence is a collection of buzzwords and gives zero coherent reason as to why Prolif standard of competitiveness constitutes the linchpin to hegemony. No new extrapolation of the back half shiftiness prevents effective class. 2. The Hilbert evidence about proliferation standard, which is the only delineated link between nuclear energy and heads. 3. We have 0 to 1AC. They're all causes in their uniqueness. 1AC warning 25. Targeted terror threats and proposals for territorial expansion into Greenland led to universal condemnation, widespread poverty, chaos led to a collapse of existing political and social structures. Skip the rest of the response and go to C2. Actually, real quick, Matt probably responds. Obviously, if countries have for nuclear weapons, they're not the biggest countries have nuclear weapons, they're not able to go to war. C2. Firstly, 1. If you're hungry, how are you fighting? Saladin 14. Conflict declines during scarcity. Groups need food to maintain harmony. It is difficult to sustain their operation distress. 2. No food. Where's the FBI? This is only one cherry-picked example. That's fine.
Okay. Are you ready for thoughts?
Yeah.
Okay. I'll take the first question.
Real quick, do you want more?
No, that's fine. Well, do you, Kaylee?
No.
Okay. On prolif, you say that we only need one more country to proliferate and that triggers your impact,
yeah.
And the athlete that the U.S. does. The U.S. already has nukes. How does the U.S. investing in nuclear energy constitute as proliferation?
You have conceded both links. The first link is that when the U.S. substantially invests in nuclear technology, it indicates that it's not going to adhere to global standards of the NPT, which is why it indicates that other countries are allowed to proliferate. We have
Wait.
also read uniqueness evidence on our European proliferation scenario that says countries are already unstable, but they're not likely to proliferate unless the U.S. does.
The U.S.
Secondly,
has already proliferated. The U.S.
They
has
have
nuclear weapons. That is what proliferation means.
yes, but our argument is investing substantially now when countries are unstable will break the NPT that has had a tradition for over 50 years and prevent proliferation.
Wait, what would the investment look like if we already have nuclear weapons? If you're saying it's not
Our
investing in
argument is
civilian
about
nuclear
breaking the
energy.
NPT while it's
How?
still active.
What clause of the NPT?
We're not, wait.
What part of the NPT is the AF violating?
1, violating the ability to export to other countries. 2, violating the ability to actually invest. It indicates a perception that we're going to invest in more nuclear technology. It's a perceptual argument.
Wait, none of that is inherent to the AF, though. Is investing in more nuclear technology violating the NPT for the U.S.?
It's not about
Because countries are
violating-
increasing their nuclear arsenals all the time. What part of the NPT does the U.S. investing in
Again,
nuclear
it's about
technology
the U.S. that it indicates that the U.S. is going to not adhere to global standards. 1, it's a perceptual argument, but 2, you've also conceded the other link that we're going to export low enriched uranium to other
that's
countries.
fine. You're not answering my question, but you can take one.
Both of which indicate proliferation, for sure. Let's go to your food war scenario.
Yeah.
So your evidence indicates that food wars happen as a result of climate change. So if you have agreed to the uniqueness that emissions are increasing, would that also not mean that food wars are inevitably going to happen?
Wait, first of all, no. Our argument about food wars is that food wars occur when there is not enough land and enough agriculture to sustain the global food demand. But even if you want to go for this climate, Lincoln, emissions are up right now. We are the affirmative. That means the status quo is bad and you vote for us to solve it. I'll take a question.
Wait,
you
that doesn't
say that
answer
mutually
mine.
assured destruction means there's no nuclear war. Doesn't that take you out of your own nuclear
No,
war
our
scenario?
argument is that mutually assured destruction only happens between these great powers since they know that they can take each other down. But you have conceded the other risk, i.e. the fact that terrorists are looking in, that only happens when global governance and trust goes away.
Just to
2,
clarify,
you've also conceded that European proliferation does not entangle
Really quick,
with security.
just to clarify, does that take you out of your economic decline causes nuclear war scenario then?
No. Our
Why?
scenario...
Because that our evidence is talking about nuclear war between major powers.
Yeah,
so
but
does that take you
evidence,
out of that scenario?
The Wishart evidence is in the context of the South China Sea and how Taiwan feels insecure and thus they get the U.S. to proliferate. To get the U.S. to go to war. Our argument is that if the U.S.'s economy declines, then the MAD scenario does not matter since they're coming in the form of other countries. It's not the U.S. attacking for itself, but rather in defense of other countries.
We'll start.
Wait, sorry, how much was that?
129, so we have 131 left.
It's just gonna go the affirmatives arguments and then go on the negatives arguments. Alright. Is anybody not ready? Cool. At the very top, they try to tell you that nuclear energy fails. However, these two arguments are not relevant. First of all, they tell you there's inefficient regulation. However, this is not implicated. There is no regulation that they cite that is needed in order for things like nuclear energy to save more land, in order to have more agriculture. There's no implication. Don't let them make a new one. But then the second argument about technological advancement, that doesn't even implicate to nuclear energy. They're just saying like writ large, nuclear technology is not good. We've disproven that by showing you that since it removes the dependence on fossil fuels and saves us agricultural land, it means that we're able to innovate even better. On C1, it's all defense. You're voting for us on our contention 2 about food. Right now, farmland is significantly decreasing, and so is food insecurity. However, when you do the affirmative and replace things like coal mining and solar power and also fossil fuels, it saves a bunch of land. Our evidence is really explicit that nuclear energy power plants save 37 times more land than all the other energy efficient. That's really important because U.S. food and agriculture is key to global agriculture. When that part of the puzzle goes away, it means that we have global chaos and there's food chains that are completely disrupted, which causes food war because countries are literally going starving. That causes nuclear war because empirically we see that when countries are starving without food supply, they tend to act rationally, cause nuclear war in order to get more resources. This causes extinction. The only thing they have time to say in their last speech is that people who are hungry will not fight. This is just empirically true and doesn't make any sense. We would say that because they are desperate, they're more likely to lash out in things like civil war. That's why empirically people done it. That's why we saw it in Syria. However, it escalates when the United States gets involved because every single country is starving. That increases the likelihood of nuclear war, but then prefers on probability. Economic decline has never caused nuclear war or any of the modern wars that they talk about. We've empirically seen food wars would escalate even more, but also they tell you that MAD means that there is no nuclear war. However, we would say that it just doesn't matter. MAD is a theoretical concept. If people are more desperate, then the theory of MAD goes away anyways. But then let's go to their argument. On their contention 1 about oil, they just tell you that, right now the economy is doing well. However, our uniqueness is way more holistic. The economy is currently stagnating, which means that we should have ways to right it. Otherwise, their impact is inevitable. They have not responded to the term that fossil fuel reliance decks the economy. The evidence tells you that because fossil fuel created so many bad impacts on things like the climate, on people's health, it decks the U.S. GDP by 10.5%. That's the only number we give you in round. If the economy is doing bad and fossil fuels are bad, when you switch to nuclear energy, it means the economy is more stable and prevents all of the war scenarios they talk about in the long term, which is way better for conflict. But then, let's go to the climate debate. They just say, we'll agree emissions are increasing. We're the affirmative. If they've agreed that the status quo is bad, you should probably affirm to change something. We tell you that nuclear energy saves a bunch of emissions because it's low carbon, takes less land, and there's less mining compared to fossil fuels. And they've also agreed that climate change causes extinction. Even if you don't want to vote on the war scenarios, they told you that emissions are increasing. We should do something. Nuclear energy solves for emission. They say it takes too long. We both have the same time frame. Both of our arguments rely on the nuclear power plants being built. At that point, you can create long-term benefits by having nuclear energy. But then, let's talk about C2 about proliferation. They've conceded the fact that ceding leadership to adversaries for nuclear energy is a bad thing. When we no longer invest in nuclear energy, it means that Russia and China can dominate the industry, and they're way more likely to convince other actors like Iran to proliferate, which causes global proliferation and more of the conflict and hotspots they talk about, which is far worse. They don't respond to it. They just say there's no uniqueness. The uniqueness is the fact that they're not proliferating and the fact that China has power.
We'll take that starting now. You have 3 seconds left. You guys can go.
Yeah.
Order is just going to be the neg and then the off. Is everyone good? You should be voting on oil. They've conceded that wages are increasing and unemployment is down. Overall, the economy is stable. Affirming change that because whenever you implement nuclear technology, means that there's a structural shift in the demand for oil. Specifically, it declines. That's uniquely bad for oil companies because whenever oil demand decreases, it also means that prices decrease. That's uniquely bad for oil companies because it means that they're not going to be able to get any return on investment on any of their projects. That's uniquely bad for the economy because it hurts economies like the U.S., Russia, and Saudi Arabia. Those all cause an economic recession that uniquely causes war because hotspots around the world escalate and causes great prices to get on, which causes nuclear war, causes extinction. The rest of this extinction was fully conceded. It should definitely be the first place you vote on. But then let's go to the responses. They say that stagnation is increasing. Now you've conceded that even if their evidence is not holistic, does not analyze any factors. They haven't told you what their evidence analyzes. But even then, you should still prefer arguments. You can see that posters. But even that our evidence also has. But even that the Fed also agrees with our evidence, which is why they haven't raised interest rates. You should definitely agree with the prefer arguments. But then on the turn, they said that costs increase. Even if their argument is about a long-term change in GDP increase. But our argument is about Argument is about the short-term shock. Argument is about a short-term shock in price, which causes oil to immediately decrease. Countries obviously aren't going to be able to adapt to that. But even then, their evidence is horrible. It does not actually identify when this happens. It only identifies that the impact happens by 2100. Obviously, it means that our impact happens faster. But then on the way, first is that argument outweighs on time. You can see that our argument is perceptual. It's about people's investor confidence in the oil industry. Well, their argument it all takes years for nuclear power plants to actually build. Again, more into that defense of their case. But second, we said that argument turns their case. Obviously, if we're in the middle of things like petrol wars because countries want to continue revitalizing their markets, it means that we're not going to be able to solve for things like food insecurity because countries are going to be too focused on fighting other things. But then on the climate stuff, even if we can see the uniqueness, you can see that there's literally no solvency from the act. You can see the green paradox specifically. You can see that whenever you do the affirmative, it means that oil companies are going to be more sunlight, continue burning more, and that's uniquely bad because it destroys our carbon budget since companies in the US are end up going 12% over our carbon budget. That's uniquely bad. You can see that. You've also considered that nuclear energy takes way too long to implement. That definitely means that they don't have any solvency on their arguments. But then on proliferation quickly. We'll concede to the non-unique, but first, this wasn't in rebuttal, but second, they also haven't extended the impact of proliferation, not something you should be voting on. Then, there's like, you really messed up the overview. I'm going for the first piece of evidence. The right 23 evidence is really good. I identify that things like land licensing, construction permits, and NRC regulations all mean that it takes years for us to actually even be able to build nuclear reactors in presence, much less see a return on investment from the energy from that. Katie just said that this is not relevant. Our evidence says that it takes 20 years for this to happen. Katie just says it's not relevant. Obviously, the entirety of the argument is premised on nuclear energy being effective. If it takes 20 years for that to happen, it means that obviously things like food wars are going to be inevitable. It also means that this is an alternative cause to any other solvency. It's also a terminal solvency deficit. You have not actually watch out this argument. The second argument I'm going to go for is on food war specifically. First, I'm going to go for the argument that obviously food is key to being able to sustain military operations. Obviously, if you don't have food, you're not going to be able to do that because you're not going to be able to feed your soldiers. Katie just said that this is empirically false. Syria evidence is the Syria empiric is horrible. Obviously, this is because of things like Bashar al-Assad being a horrible dictator. Even though he says this is not by empirics like Ukraine, where grain production decreased significantly during the Ukraine war, that did not cause any impacts to happen. But even then, you also can see that climate change is an alternative cause. Your own evidence scientist. You should have better evidence scientists if you want to try and win this round.
Are you guys ready for this?
Yeah.
Okay. I will start the timer now. Okay, let's look at this time frame weighing about perception. Even if we buy that, let's just say the perception is of investors pulling out. Your ultimate impact about escalating global hotspots, what's the time frame of that?
We'd say it happens relatively quickly because our evidence is very specific in that this is a global decline. Investors immediately pull out whenever they see that countries end up exporting, whenever countries like the US end up switching to nuclear energy, means that they feel like oil ends up becoming high risk because there's not federal support for that. But more of the economic decline happens relatively quickly because whenever investors pull out, it means that immediately companies aren't going to be able to see any sort of investment. They're not going to be able to see any sort of return on investment.
I'm asking about the time frame on your impact that says that global hotspots escalate. Your evidence has never said that happens relatively fast. That evidence
you should look at the astronomy evidence. It's actually really good on this.
Wait, read me the line that says global hotspots escalate immediately when there's perceived investment pull out.
I don't remember the verbatim, but the astronomy evidence said that petrostates are more inclined to initiate war whenever they see their markets are bad because they want to try and revitalize those markets by capturing more oil shares of other countries.
I mean, your evidence doesn't say that, but
it definitely does.
The highlighting does not say that. That's your own analysis of the evidence. It just tells you that gradually over time, economic decline could cause increases in hotspots because of insecurity. It never says, oh, they immediately go to war right away. It literally just talks about escalating hotspots, which still takes forever, which means the time frame on your link doesn't matter if your impact still takes forever to happen. But you can take the question.
Here, I'll read you the lines. In particular, the prospect of declining demand for oil and gas and resulting disproportionate macroeconomic impacts on producing countries could drive geopolitical conflict or political maneuvering aiming to capture larger shares of declining markets, it indicates that as soon as declining markets go down, then countries are forced to bring that up.
The second you started your own analysis, it says that as soon as markets go down. The highlighted part that you read literally does not say that it happens immediately. The latter half of your evidence says that hotspots take forever to escalate, and empirically, we have not seen that.
I think you're reading the wrong piece of evidence.
No, I'm looking at the impact evidence of your C1, but it's been 2 minutes. You can
Impact
take
is
a question.
star, dude. What do you mean? Like the terminalized impact, or are you looking at the internal
The
impact?
escalating of global hotspots.
Oh, Wishart
So your
evidence. Yeah,
internal.
it still
Sure,
says
it's
that
not,
it's
your
not
impact, it's your internal.
The Wishart evidence, first line, weakened systems only require the smallest shock to edge past the tipping point of resilience. I think that's a pretty good line.
That's talking, sure, we can, I've given you that, right? Like, even if we assume that tipping point, the tipping point evidence you just read about, is about economic shocks. Ultimately, your terminalized impact of economic shocks is that those economic shocks ultimately cause escalating of global hotspots. What I'm indicting is the fact that your evidence about global hotspots still takes forever, which means the time frame on your link doesn't matter. We haven't read another impact to economic shocks. If the global hotspots still take forever, that still takes forever.
Wait,
But
here's the
that's
problem, right? Wait, there's 10 seconds left.
Oh.
The first line talks about losing resilience, which means immediately we are vulnerable to those threats. You have completely conceded there's so many hotspots that anyone could escalate, and that's probably good enough time frame analysis to 20 years.
Immediately we are vulnerable is your own analysis, but that's for us. We'll take the remainder of our prep starting now.
Alright. I got that as press.
Okay. It's gonna be starting on weighing, and then our case, and then their case. Is anybody not ready? They try to go all in on this time framing, but first we fiat that the AF means that there's building nuclear reactors in order for us to have any ground, but then second, their impact also doesn't trigger until the reactors are actually built. Their evidence doesn't say perception, so don't let them just like put in their own analysis. But then third, their 20 years evidence just says that it takes 20 years till the plants are operational. But in order for our case to happen, we just need the contracts to be given to the places that are going to build nuclear reactors because they're more land efficient. But then they remember they concede our probability weighing, saying that economic decline has never actually caused war, but we've seen food wars happen empirically in places like Syria, and they just say that a war means that you can't solve like a food crisis. There's zero reward for this. We see as long as we have land, we can grow food, but then extend food. Right now, farmland is down and food insecurity is up. The AF is key because it's 37 times more efficient than other alternatives in order to save farmland, and that's key because if we don't have any farmland, then we can't grow any agriculture, and U.S. agricultural supply is key to global demand. Otherwise, there's going to be a global food shortage, and people get really desperate, which means that they fight in food wars, but ultimately go nuclear and cause continued decimation of the climate. They just say people are too hungry to fight. However, no. They sell things like stockpiled weapons, and they can see the analysis that Kaylee makes in summary, saying that when people are desperate, they're more likely to increase their lash out. Then they say that climate change is an all cause, which is in our own evidence. First, we say nuclear energy solves because comparatively more, it releases less emissions than fossil fuels do. But then second, they don't even say which piece of our evidence says this. You're not going to vote on it. But then let's go to their argument about oil. Starting on uniqueness. Right now, the economy is doing really bad, and our evidence is more holistic. They say it's not. However, no. We cite things like unemployment, business dynamism, and secular stagnation, all reasons why our economy is doing bad. They just say that ours is looking at like the long term. No, ours looks at the short term too, and proves that their impact is going to happen in their world. Then they say that there's evidence is more recent. However, no. Both of our evidence is written literally within a week of each other. At that point, you just look at the warrants. We are the only ones that cite what our evidence actually analyzes. You're going to vote for us. But then, remember that fossil fuel reliance is decks the economy. They can see this in their rebuttal. You're voting for us here. It decreases GDP by 10.5%. They just say that this is only by 2100. However, in the short term, it is still bad for the economy, still more likely to cause their economic stagnation impacts their own impacts. They don't respond to this in rebuttal. It is literally a dropped turn. It's very easy to vote for us. You're voting for us.
Alright, I have 3 seconds. Order is going to be neg aft. Brand new weighing should not be the tiebreaker. It's really simple on our case. Go to the oil's contention. They say unemployment will cause recession. Our evidence postdates by over a week and says that unemployment has been at a historic low 4%. Read their evidence. Where does it say that secular stagnation is immediately going to cause recession? It doesn't. It's a long-term analysis as to why recession is likely within the next 100 years. Does not mean that recession is going to happen now. At that point, extend the argument that overall oil prices are stabilizing the economy, but immediately investing in nuclear energy will cause a transition away from oil. It does not require nuclear facilities to be built. Just investment in nuclear technology shifts the perception of investors into thinking that oil is no longer profitable compared to nuclear technology, which is why overall the Estania evidence says that we will lose $3 trillion for the oil market, which immediately causes volatility and causes conflict. Remember, the link is conceded, and they've conceded that immediately it's broad decline because it's not just one investor pulling out, but rather the entire transition that happens perceptually. Now, on the internal link, this is where they have the most analysis. They real quick on the term, they say that the reliance is gonna harm our economy, 10.5% GDP. Read the evidence is by 2100, and even in the last speech, they don't give you a warrant as to why reliance is bad. Really, really bad analysis. Now, on nuke war, they've conceded that it's immediate. Remember, the Wishart evidence says that even the smallest shocks will harm our resilience, which causes great power draw and immediately causing extinction. All of it's conceded. The time frame analysis is also so clean. They've conceded that our link is perceptual, while it definitely takes over 20 years to create nuclear reactors. Remember, the app only fiats the investment in nuclear energy, not actually building nuclear reactors. They've conceded construction, getting licenses, etc. all take 20 years to even solve that for their food security scenario. And they've conceded we turn case because if we have lower economic resilience, we're never able to actually get food, etc. from other countries. Their case. 2 key responses I'm going for. I've already done the analysis as to why it takes way too long for their link to solve, but they have also conceded that there's zero empirics of food wars. The only reason Syria happened was because there was a dictator causing oppression, which is why he was overthrown.
Alright, good round, guys.
Good
Thank
round.
you for judging.
Good round.